A determined woman arrived at a failing ranch. Give me one chance, I won't waste it. If you pull that trigger, the water stays buried forever. The voice cut through the hot, stagnant wind like a serrated blade. Wyatt's eyes snapped open. He sat on the edge of the splintered porch of the Sundown Ranch, staring at the single brass cartridge in his trembling hand. One for the bank? He had whispered to the empty, bone-dry plains just moments ago. One for the road. He had slid the bullet into the chamber of his Winchester, ready to surrender to the drought. But now, he looked up. A woman stood 20 paces away, framed by a swirling funnel of red dust. The Arizona horizon behind her was a jagged line of withered saguaro cacti silhouetted against a sky the color of dried blood. She was tattered, her dress stained the color of the earth, with a heavy wooden chest slung across her shoulder by a fraying rope. Her eyes wide and amber burned with a terrifying, lucid intensity. "Who the hell are you?" Wyatt barked, his voice cracking. "Get off my land! The bank takes the deed at sunrise. There is nothing left here but ghosts." The woman stepped forward, her boots crunching on the parched soil. "I am Sarah Mercer. I am not interested in your deed. I am looking for the vein." Wyatt let out a dry, jagged laugh. "The vein? Look around you. The cattle are bone. The grass is ash. This land is dead, girl. This bullet is the only thing of value left here." Sarah did not flinch. She walked toward the porch, stopping where the shadow met the dirt. She looked at his right pant leg, pinned up to reveal a crude limb of oak and iron. "You were a soldier. You know how to fight for a lost cause. Why stop now?" "Because you cannot shoot a drought," Wyatt spat. He lowered the rifle to his lap, his finger still resting near the trigger guard. "Why are you here? Looking for a place to die?" Sarah swung the heavy wooden chest off her shoulder. It hit the porch with a solid, metallic thud. "I know where the water is hiding," she said, her voice dropping to a low, commanding hum. "This land isn't dry, Wyatt. It is just guarded by stone." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "You are chasing a ghost, girl. There is nothing under that rock but hellfire." "I want your survival," Sarah countered, stepping onto the porch to loom over him. "Give me one chance. I will not waste it. I will find water before the sun sets on the 7th day. If I fail, use that bullet then. But for now, put the gun down and give me a shovel." Wyatt looked at the brass cartridge inside his rifle, then at her. Slowly, he moved his hand away from the trigger. 7 days, Wyatt hissed. "Then I pull the lever." The next morning, the Arizona sun rose not with light, but with a vengeance. By noon, the temperature hit a blistering 104 degrees. The air shimmered, thick and suffocating, turning the Sundown Ranch into an open-air furnace. Wyatt stood on the edge of the porch, leaning heavily on a wooden crutch. He looked at Sarah, then kicked a rusted, splinter-handled shovel off the wooden deck. It clattered into the dust at her feet. "You want a chance? There it is," Wyatt sneered, pointing the tip of his crutch toward a shallow, rock-choked crater 50 yards away. "That's my father's old well, dry since the war. Dig." Sarah didn't argue. She picked up the heavy iron tool and walked straight into the blinding heat. The earth was baked into solid clay and shale. Every violent strike of the shovel sent bone-rattling tremors up Sarah's arms. The dull blade barely scratched the surface, chipping away mere dust. But she raised it, locked her jaw, and struck again, and again. Wyatt dragged a chair to the edge of the porch's meager shade. He watched her work, his eyes narrowed, morbidly curious to see how long a city woman's delusion could last before her body completely broke. "You're wasting your sweat, girl," Wyatt called out, his voice sharp and mocking over the wind. "There's nothing under that rock but hellfire. A smart rat would have run back to the city by now. Sarah ignored him. Sweat poured down her soot-stained face, stinging her eyes. Her breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. The wooden handle, weathered and rough, aggressively chewed into her bare palms. Within an hour, blisters formed. Within 2, they tore open. Bright crimson blood began to smear the pale wood, but her rhythm never faltered. Thud, scrape, heave. Wyatt's sneer slowly faded as the afternoon dragged on. The relentless, rhythmic sound of iron hitting rock was maddening. She wasn't stopping. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for water. She was just bleeding into his dead earth. He pushed himself up, limping out into the sun. The cruelty in his voice was now laced with a defensive, almost angry frustration. "Are you looking for water, or digging your own grave?" Wyatt barked. Sarah paused. She leaned her weight against the rusted shovel, her chest heaving violently. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her amber eyes locked onto his, completely devoid of defeat. She wiped a bloody, dirt-caked palm across her brow, leaving a stark red smear on her skin. "If I die, just use this hole to bury me," Sarah fired back, her voice raspy but fiercely steady. "Save some effort for a man who's already given up." She turned her back to him, raised the blood-stained shovel, and struck the earth again. Wyatt stood frozen in the scorching heat, the words hitting him harder than the Winchester's recoil ever could. For the first time in 3 years, the ghost of the Sundown Ranch had absolutely nothing left to say. The desert night dropped like an anvil, instantly replacing the suffocating inferno with a bone-chilling freeze. A pale, skeletal moon hung low over the Sundown Ranch, casting sharp, elongated shadows across the cracked earth. Inside the pitch-black cabin, the rhythmic thud of the shovel had finally ceased, but Wyatt could not sleep. His shattered leg throbbed with the biting cold. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed his wooden crutch, swinging his weight toward the door. Sarah was still out there. She sat in the center of the frosted yard, shivering in her thin, sweat-stiffened dress. The heavy wooden chest sat wide open before her. Wyatt pushed the cabin door open, the rusted hinges whining sharply into the wind. He limped onto the porch, pulling a frayed wool blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Looking for a warm coat in there, city girl?" Wyatt called out, his voice a harsh bark cutting through the wind. "Because frostbite will kill you faster than thirst." Sarah didn't look up. Under the cold moonlight, she wasn't pulling out velvet gowns or silver mirrors. Her bloodied, bandaged hands carefully lifted out stacks of crumbling, hand-drawn geological maps. Next came weather-beaten leather journals, their pages black with frantic charcoal sketches. Finally, she withdrew a heavy brass pendulum suspended from a tarnished silver chain. Wyatt frowned, his grip tightening on the crutch. "What the hell is that?" "My father's life," Sarah replied, her voice raspy but steady. She stood up, the wind whipping her loose hair across her soot-stained face. "He was the best water dowser in the territory. He tracked deep aquifers that geology professors swore didn't exist." "Water dowsers are con men," Wyatt spat, hobbling down the first porch step. "They wave a magic twig, take a desperate man's gold, and leave him digging straight to hell." "He wasn't a con man," Sarah shot back, her amber eyes locking onto his in the dark. "He was a scientist who knew how to feel the earth, and he mapped a massive underground artery right beneath our feet." Without waiting for his cynical reply, she wrapped the silver chain around her torn, bleeding palm. She let the heavy brass pendulum dangle inches above the frozen dirt. Closing her eyes, she began to walk. Step by slow step, she moved blindly past the empty water troughs, past the bleached cattle bones, surrendering her senses entirely to the subtle magnetic pull of the metal. Wyatt watched, the bitter mockery dying in his throat. He had seen madness out here, men drinking sand, men talking to buzzards, but her movements were not frantic, they were deliberate, precise. Suddenly, the pendulum trembled. The brass weight violently jerked, pulling to the left against the howling wind. Sarah stopped dead. She dropped to her knees, the sharp shale biting into her skin. Without hesitating, she pressed her bare cheek directly against the freezing dirt. She closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling slowly, as if trying to synchronize her heartbeat with the deep, buried pulse of the planet. "What are you doing now?" Wyatt demanded, his voice dropping to a tense whisper. He stepped closer, leaning heavily over his crutch. "You think you can hear water through 50 feet of solid bedrock?" Sarah kept her ear pressed to the dirt. Her torn fingers gently traced a dry, jagged crack in the soil. "I am listening," she whispered. The wind caught her words, carrying them through the frost. She finally opened her eyes, looking up at Wyatt from the frozen ground. "My father always said the earth never lies, Wyatt. It is only men who do not know how to listen." Wyatt stared down at her. The icy wind howled around them, but for the first time in 3 years, he felt a terrifying, unfamiliar spark ignite in his hollow chest. He turned away, retreating into the dark cabin. The brass cartridge in his pocket suddenly felt like a coward's way out. The horizon didn't just darken, it vanished. A massive, churning wall of red earth swallowed the sky, turning mid-afternoon into a suffocating, violent twilight. The wind hit the sundown ranch like a runaway freight train. Inside the cabin, the floorboards pitched violently. Wyatt clung to the windowsill, squinting into the blinding maelstrom. Through the thick red haze, he saw a shadow frantically wrestling with a heavy hemp rope. "Sarah!" Wyatt roared over the deafening wind. By the dilapidated stable, Sarah threw her entire weight against the rope, desperately trying to tie down the buckling tin roof. The wind shrieked, ripping the coarse fibers through her blistered palms. Inside the stall, the ranch's last surviving horse, a skeletal gray mare, whinnied in pure terror. The thunderous crack of splitting wood shattered the air. The panicked mare reared up, its iron-shod hooves slamming violently against the stable's rotting front gate. The impact was the final blow. The main support pillar, termite-eaten and brittle, snapped perfectly in half with a sickening crack. "No!" Sarah screamed, shielding her face. The heavy wooden crossbeam detached, plunging directly toward her head. Wyatt didn't think. He didn't reach for his crutch. He kicked the cabin door open and hurled himself into the blinding storm. Sand tore at his face like flying glass. He moved with a clumsy, agonizing desperation, dragging his heavy, iron-pegged leg through the shifting dirt, driven purely by adrenaline. "Grab my hand!" Wyatt roared, lunging forward. He caught Sarah by the waist, using his momentum to violently tackle her backward into the dirt, just as the roof collapsed. A deafening crash shook the ground. The massive beam smashed into the earth exactly where Sarah had been standing a second ago, burying the rope under a ton of splintered wood and twisted tin. Wyatt gasped, choking on the red dust. He grabbed Sarah's arm, hauling her up. "Run! Get to the house!" They practically fell through the cabin doorway, slamming the heavy oak door shut against the howling beast outside. The cramped kitchen was pitch black, lit only by violent, dusty slivers of light piercing through the wall slats. They collapsed onto the floorboards, hacking up dry dirt, their chests heaving. Wyatt leaned his head against the cupboards, clutching his right stump. He squeezed his eyes shut, his jaw clamped in agonizing pain. The reckless sprint had torn the scarred skin around his oak prosthetic. Sarah crawled over to him, wiping a thick layer of dust from her face. "Let me look at it." "Leave it," Wyatt grunted, pushing her hands away. He stared blankly at the dark ceiling as the wind battered the walls. "I shouldn't have gone out there. I should have let the timber crush us both." Sarah froze, sitting back on her heels. "You don't mean that." "Look at this place, Sarah." Wyatt barked, a bitter, broken laugh escaping his throat. He gestured to his crude wooden leg, then at the rattling kitchen walls. "I was a sniper at Gettysburg. I stood my ground against 100 men. But out here, the wind blows, and I'm just a crippled beggar." He dropped his head, his voice cracking, finally shedding his tough, cynical exterior. "I lost my leg defending a nation, but now I can't even protect an inch of my father's land. The bank gets the dirt, the wind takes the wood, and I'm just sitting here waiting for it to happen." Sarah listened to the wind shrieking outside. She looked at her own bloodied, dirt-caked hands. "Before the Panic of '73, my family owned 3 blocks in Philadelphia," she said quietly, her voice piercing the storm's roar. "When the banks failed, they took our house. Then the fever took my father. We went from silk beds to sleeping in train yards. I know what it means to be stripped bare." She reached out, gently but firmly placing her bandaged hand over his trembling fist. "But Wyatt," she whispered fiercely, her amber eyes locking onto his in the dim light, "losing a piece of your body doesn't mean you have to lose your soul." Wyatt stared at her hand on his. The storm raged outside, but inside the cramped kitchen, the terrifying silence of his defeat was finally broken. The morning after the storm, the Arizona sky was eerily calm, washed into a pale, bruised violet. The Sundown Ranch was buried under a fresh layer of red silt, but the suffocating tension that had choked the air for days was gone. By the collapsed stable, the sharp thwack of a hammer rang out. Wyatt wasn't sitting on the porch waiting to die. He had his crutch jammed firmly into the dirt under his left arm, holding a splintered fence rail with his right. "Hold it steady," he grunted, a rusted nail clenched between his teeth. Sarah leaned her entire weight against the wooden post, securing it. Wyatt swung the heavy iron hammer. For the first time since she arrived, they were moving not in opposition, but in tandem. "Let me clear the dirt from the post hole," Wyatt said, grabbing the rusted shovel from her. He dug the blade in, but as he pivoted to throw the earth, his wooden peg hit a patch of loose, treacherous shale. His balance vanished. Wyatt crashed hard into the dirt, the shovel clattering loudly against the stones. A sharp, jagged curse tore from his throat. He clenched his jaw, staring at the dust, waiting for the humiliating sting of her pity. It never came. Sarah calmly walked over and knelt beside him. She didn't gasp or coddle him like a broken victim. She simply offered her torn, bandaged hand. "Get up, soldier. The sun is burning our daylight." 10 minutes later, they sat, side by side, on the edge of the porch. The heat was fierce, but a rare pocket of shade offered sanctuary. Sarah gently unbuckled the heavy leather straps of his crude prosthetic. The skin around his stump was raw and bleeding from the violent fall. She dipped a torn rag into a tin cup containing 2 fingers of their precious drinking water. Carefully, she pressed the cool, damp cloth against his scarred, feverish flesh. Wyatt flinched, but he didn't pull away. He looked down at her bowed head. Her hair was matted with dust, her hands calloused and bruised. She was no longer a delusional stranger invading his grave. She was a comrade holding the line in the trenches. "I haven't held a hammer in 2 years," Wyatt murmured, watching her meticulously wrap a clean linen bandage around his leg. "Your aim is still true," Sarah replied quietly, tying off the knot. She stood up, walking to the edge of the porch. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long, golden shadows across the dead earth. She closed her eyes, tilting her chin up toward the barren horizon. "Come here, Wyatt," she said softly. He pulled himself up with the porch rail and limped to her side. "Close your eyes," Sarah instructed. "Don't look at the dry dirt, just feel." Wyatt hesitated, then let his heavy eyelids shut. "The wind usually burns," Sarah whispered, her voice a soothing, hypnotic cadence. "But feel it right now, against your jaw. It's heavier, it's clinging to your skin. That is moisture, Wyatt. The aquifer is pushing vapor up through the limestone cracks. It's breathing, it's close." Wyatt took a slow, deep breath. For the first time, he didn't smell just hot dust and despair. He felt a faint, phantom coolness, a ghost of water, a ghost of hope. He opened his eyes and looked at her profile. The harsh, bitter lines of his own face had completely softened. "You know." Wyatt breathed out, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "Today, I forgot. I only have one leg." Sarah turned to him. The sunset caught the amber in her eyes, radiant and remarkably kind. "Because today," she replied, a faint, beautiful smile breaking through the dirt on her face, "you chose to walk with your will." The fragile peace of the morning was violently shattered by the thunder of hooves. A thick cloud of red dust rolled up the driveway. 3 riders broke through the haze, halting their sweating horses just yards from the cabin. At the center sat Black Jack. Dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit that mocked the desert heat, he was a ruthless land speculator who fed on the corpses of failed ranches. He spat a chewed cigar end into the dirt and pulled a folded legal document from his vest. "Morning, Wyatt," Jack called out, his voice smooth and oily. "The bank got tired of waiting. The foreclosure is effective immediately." Wyatt stiffened. He grabbed his crutch, pulling himself up from the porch steps. "The contract said, sunrise tomorrow, Jack. You're trespassing." Jack laughed, an ugly, grating sound. His 2 heavily armed henchmen casually rested their hands on the grips of their revolvers. Jack's predatory eyes drifted past Wyatt, landing on Sarah. "I see you found yourself some company." Jack sneered, looking her up and down with blatant disgust. "A filthy stray to keep you warm before the end. Tell the beggar to pack her rags. I want you both off my property within the hour." One of the henchmen dismounted, moving toward the porch with a smirk, uncoiling a leather whip to herd them out like cattle. He didn't make it 2 steps. Clack, clack. The metallic crack of Wyatt's Winchester repeater echoed like a cannon blast. The henchman froze. Wyatt stood at the edge of the porch, leaning his weight into his crutch. The broken, hollowed-out ghost from 2 days ago was completely gone. In his place stood the lethal, icy sniper of Gettysburg. His iron sights were locked dead between Black Jack's eyes. "Take another step toward her," Wyatt rumbled, his voice a deadly, terrifying calm, "and I'll paint this dead earth with your brains." The henchmen drew their guns, but Black Jack raised a gloved hand, halting them. He looked at the unwavering steel barrel, a dark amusement flashing in his eyes. "You're a fool, Wyatt," Jack scoffed, though a drop of sweat rolled down his neck. "Even if you shoot me, the law will hang you. Would you rather die of thirst on this pile of sand, Wyatt?" Wyatt didn't blink. His finger tightened on the trigger. "I would rather die of thirst as a man than live rich as your dog." The standoff was a powder keg, a millisecond away from a total bloodbath. Then Sarah stepped forward. She didn't cower behind Wyatt. She walked right past the Winchester's barrel and stood defiantly at the edge of the porch. 12 o'clock, Sarah declared, her voice slicing through the heavy tension. "Tomorrow, at noon." Jack narrowed his eyes at her. "Excuse me?" "We are striking water," Sarah said, pointing to her father's heavy wooden chest resting on the deck. "Inside that box are solid gold instruments and geological maps worth more than this entire county. If the water doesn't rise by exactly noon tomorrow, we leave quietly, and the chest is yours." Jack stared at the iron-bound chest. Pure greed flickered in his cold eyes. A bloodless victory and a lucrative bonus prize. He yanked his horse's reins, turning the beast around. "You have until high noon tomorrow, stray. After that, I'm bringing the sheriff, and we shoot the dog." The riders galloped away, leaving a suffocating cloud of dust. Sarah turned to look at the dry, gaping hole in the earth. The final clock had officially started ticking. The gold pocket watch snapped shut with a sharp click. 11:45 a.m. The Arizona sun was a white-hot anvil, beating down relentlessly on the Sundown Ranch. The air was so dry, it burned the lungs. Under the meager shade of a dead oak tree, Black Jack sat confidently on his black stallion, lighting a fresh cigar. His men lounged nearby, their triumphant smirks visible through the shimmering heat waves. Sarah's heavy wooden chest had already been dragged to the edge of the porch, waiting to be claimed as the spoils of war. 30 feet away, at the bottom of a massive, excavated crater, the air was suffocating. Sarah swung the heavy iron pickaxe with the last ounce of her fading strength. Clang! A violent spark flew. The iron head snapped clean off the splintered wooden handle, ricocheting uselessly against the unforgiving bedrock. Sarah froze. Her breathing was a ragged, whistling wheeze. The broken handle slipped from her slick, blistered hands. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed entirely onto the hard, baked clay. 15 minutes, girl." Black Jack called down from the rim of the pit, a plume of blue smoke drifting from his lips. "Time to pack your rags and start walking." Sarah didn't look up. Tears of absolute physical exhaustion cut clean, pale tracks through the thick, dark soot on her face. "No. It's here. I know it's here." With a guttural sob of pure desperation, she plunged her bare hands into the jagged shale. She clawed at the solid bedrock with her bare, bloody fingernails, violently ripping her skin to scrape away the dust, driven by a terrifying, primal refusal to lose. A shadow fell over her. Wyatt didn't stand safely at the edge. He tossed his wooden crutch aside. Sliding down the steep, treacherous dirt embankment, he hit the bottom of the pit with a heavy grunt. He dragged his crude wooden leg across the dust and dropped to his knees right beside her. "Stop," Wyatt commanded softly. He reached out, his massive, calloused hands firmly grabbing her wrists, halting her frantic, self-destructive clawing. Sarah looked up at him, her amber eyes wide, wild, and utterly broken. "I can hear it, Wyatt," she choked out, her chest heaving violently, blood dripping from her fingertips into the dry dirt. "It's right beneath us. I swear to God, it's here." Wyatt looked at her bleeding hands, then up at the sneering faces of Black Jack's men circling the rim like vultures. He didn't see a delusional city girl anymore. He saw the only person in the world who had ever fought for his life. Wyatt pulled a heavy, rusted iron crowbar from his belt. He pressed the cold metal firmly into her bleeding palms, then wrapped his own large hands tightly over hers. "Then we break the stone," Wyatt rumbled, his iron eyes locking onto hers with absolute, unshakable conviction. "Together." 10 minutes, Jack yelled from above, pulling his revolver from its holster with a menacing clack. "I'm coming down there to shoot the dog." Wyatt and Sarah raised the heavy iron bar together. Muscles screaming, they drove it downward with every ounce of strength left in their broken bodies. Crack. The iron bit deep into a fissure. Heave. They pulled it back. Crack. "It's over, Wyatt," Jack barked, stepping right to the edge of the pit. Sarah let out a fierce, warrior's cry. They drove the iron bar down a third time, putting their entire body weight behind it, burying it up to the hilt in the bedrock. Suddenly, the earth stopped fighting. A deep, profound rumble vibrated through the soles of their boots. It wasn't a crack. It was a guttural, terrifying roar, like a sleeping beast waking deep within the bowels of the earth. "Wyatt," Sarah gasped, backing away. The dry dirt around the iron bar began to aggressively hiss. Boom! The bedrock exploded. A violent, deafening geyser of pressurized air and thick, black mud erupted from the fissure, violently throwing Wyatt and Sarah backward against the dirt walls of the crater. Black Jack stumbled back from the rim in absolute horror, his cigar falling from his slack jaw. In the pit, the deafening roar of rushing liquid entirely drowned out the desert wind. The black mud rapidly cleared, giving way to a massive, soaring pillar of crystal-clear, freezing water. It shot 20 feet into the blazing sky, catching the harsh sunlight and fracturing it into a brilliant, blinding rainbow. The water rained down upon the dry, cracked earth in torrents. It soaked the dust. It washed the blood from Sarah's hands. She sat in the pooling mud, completely drenched, her chest heaving as the icy water plastered her hair to her face. She looked at Wyatt. He was staring up at the miraculous geyser, laughing a real, thunderous laugh of pure, unadulterated joy that erased years of agony from his face. Sarah threw her head back, letting the freezing, life-giving water wash over her face. She screamed over the deafening roar of the geyser, her voice ringing with absolute triumph. "Do you see it, Wyatt? The sundown has answered us." The roar of the water was a deafening, beautiful symphony. Up on the rim of the crater, Black Jack furiously wiped freezing mud from his ruined charcoal suit. His henchmen were already fighting to control their terrified, rearing horses, backing away from the rushing flood. "This doesn't change the debt, Wyatt." Jack hollered over the roar, his face twisted in ugly, humiliated rage. "I have the deed. I have lawyers in Phoenix. I'll drown you in paper before you can sell a single drop." Wyatt climbed slowly out of the pit, completely soaked, his crude wooden leg sinking heavily into the fresh mud. He didn't reach for his Winchester. He didn't have to. He stared down Jack with the cold, absolute certainty of a man who had just conquered his own grave. "Bring your paper, Jack," Wyatt rumbled, his voice booming with a newfound terrifying authority. "But bring a bigger gun next time. This land is alive again, and so am I." Jack sneered, his face pale beneath the mud. He violently yanked his stallion's reins. "Let's ride." The speculators fled, their frantic hoofbeats quickly swallowed by the thunderous roar of the geyser. Wyatt stood tall in the mud, watching the dust settle for the very last time. 3 months later, the bruised, bleeding sky of the Arizona summer had cooled into a crisp, golden autumn. The Sundown Ranch was no longer a monument to failure. Deep, freshly dug irrigation trenches cut through the once cracked earth, carrying clear, rushing water to miles of newly sprouted, vibrant green alfalfa. The skeletal remains of the dead steers were gone, replaced by the deep, rhythmic lowing of healthy cattle crowding around overflowing wooden troughs. The stagnant, suffocating air had vanished. The wind now smelled of wet soil, sweet grass, and life. On the newly repaired porch, Wyatt sat in a sturdy rocking chair. He wasn't holding a single brass cartridge. He was whittling a piece of smooth cedar with a pocket knife. His face was still weathered by the frontier, but the hollow, haunted craters in his eyes had been filled with a quiet, steady peace. The screen door whined open. Sarah stepped out, carrying 2 steaming tin cups of black coffee. Her dress was clean and simple, but she hadn't scrubbed away the frontier. Her hands still proudly bore the faint, pale scars of the iron pickaxe. She handed him a cup and sat on the wooden step beside him, leaning her shoulder back against his chair. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the vast Arizona sky in breathtaking strokes of violet, amber, and gold. It was a beautiful, merciful sunset. Wyatt closed his pocket-knife and set his carving down. He looked out over the sprawling, green acreage, then down at the woman sitting beside him. Slowly, he reached out. His massive, calloused fingers gently wrapped around her scarred, work-worn hand. It wasn't a fragile, cinematic romance. There were no poetic vows or desperate kisses. It was the heavy, grounded grip of two soldiers who had held the line together. A silent, unshakable promise forged in blood and dust. "You saved this ranch, Sarah," Wyatt murmured, his gravelly voice breaking the peaceful twilight. Sarah kept her amber eyes fixed on the beautiful, living horizon. She squeezed his rough, calloused hand, her thumb gently tracing his knuckles. "No, Wyatt," she whispered back, the cool evening breeze carrying her words across the green plains. "We saved each other." The dust finally settled at the sundown ranch, leaving behind not a graveyard, but a blooming oasis. Wyatt and Sarah proved that even in the harshest deserts, love and hope can spring from solid rock. What did you think of their incredible journey? Would you have the courage to keep digging when everyone else gave up? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this tale touched your heart, don't let the journey end here. Hit the like button and subscribe to the Wild West Love Stories channel for more epic tales of survival and untamed romance.